Good morning. If you could bring the house lights up, I like to look people in the face. I'm one of those kind of old-fashioned. You can't hide from me. But it's good to be home. I was telling her I did my first baptism at Berea Church. I did my first funeral. One of the boys in our youth group passed, and Brother Revis and I did the funeral. And it was one of those things that a lot of growing experiences and a lot of opportunities that were given me as a young man to try to let God work in my life. And so today I come to you after preaching 40 years, and hopefully I've improved a little bit. But number one, I hope that today I can challenge you with something that will make a difference, not just in your life, but in someone else's life. A few months ago, we did a series, how we do it at First Christian Brazil. Chris gets in a series, and if he decides he wants a Sunday off, he looks at me and he says, "Hey, Mark, you're preaching such and such Sunday. Here's your topic. Here's the text. Make it fit with my series." And it's really kind of fun. Somebody says, "Isn't that like getting thrown under the bus?" Yes, it is. But it's one of those things that allows me to use my creativity and to continue to grow in my faith as I find a different slant to something. And a few months ago, we did a series about worshiping and learning how to be good neighbors. How our worship went beyond the building, and in being good neighbors, we had a positive influence for Jesus Christ. Now, when I was a kid, being a good neighbor was not an option. Because my dad would always tell me, you speak to everyone you see on the street, whether you know them or not. That's just courteous. If you pass them, you look them in the eye and you say good morning or hello. Or if you pass them and they're out cutting grass, you always wave. So being a neighbor wasn't hard for me. I learned at an early age. Our house was a neighborhood place that in the evening people would gather on the front porch, or years later we had a picnic table under the tree, and we'd look up. There'd be people from all over the neighborhood at our house. So I learned how to be a neighbor early. Today we want to take just a moment to look about neighboring to people who are lonely. In Luke chapter 10, he says, one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher asked, 'What must I do to inherit eternal life?' He says, 'What's written in the law? How do you read it?' He answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.'" Love your neighbor as yourself. Let's take a minute and pray together. Father, we're going to open today with asking, number one, that your Spirit speak to people's hearts today, that they allow themselves to hear your voice and hear your nudgings about where you want them to go with their faith. Maybe you're going to nudge them to pray for someone or to reach out to someone. But that's our prayer today, that you take words I've written down and empower them with your Spirit, with the Scriptures, that they make a difference in someone's life. We just pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, loneliness is something that's all around us. You know, it seems like songwriters know how to say it better. Only the lonely. Remember that one? Or how about, look at all the lonely people with Eleanor Rigby and the Beatles. Or country songs that says, I'm so lonesome I could cry. They have a way of putting it on paper and putting music to it, or writers of books have a way of expressing the heartfelt issues of people who are lonely. You say, why is that an issue today? Because more and more people in our world today are dealing with emotional poverty. Not just spiritual poverty, but emotional poverty. You say, how can that be? Well, the family's broken down. We can see that in our world, even here in Brazil, Indiana, with divorce and absent parents, a lack of commitment, no stable male in the home. My wife was a school teacher, and she said frequently the kids would talk about a new man every 3 or 4 months moving in to a home. A different situation, a different issue all the time. So we live in a world where that place that we called home as kids, most of us, that stable ground, isn't there. We live in a world of increased mobility. The day of a family staying in one community has long since passed, where parents and kids all live within just a few minutes or even on the same block with each other. Those are long gone. Even right here in Brazil. But the situation like that, there's no support from others. There's no encouragement for those that are struggling. There's no dad to teach a young man how to fix a faucet or a car. People are winging it because of mobility. In our neighborhood, we live in an upscale neighborhood that had a lot of people who came when they built the Destech coal gasification plant. And many of those people we would see, they would speak to us. They would come home in the evening, the garage door would go up, the garage door would go down, and they hired someone to cut their grass, and we never saw them. They lived a cocoon lifestyle. And you say, why would they do that? They knew they were only there for 1 to 3 years, and they didn't want to make close friends because they didn't want to have to say goodbye again. And we live in a world where that happens, and it makes people very lonely because they just have that personal selfie world inside their house with just their family. And they don't have those relationships that are out there. Heavy workloads. I can remember going to the New York World's Fair in 1965, going to the GE exhibit. And as we went through the GE exhibit, it had all of these time-saving gadgets. I saw the world's first microwave oven. And it was going to save my mom all kinds of time. But in spite of the gadgets we have, we still have such little time. People, many work 6 days a week. Then you throw in the fact that their kids on 2 traveling ball teams or is involved in 3 different band groups and all these things. Time chokes out relationships and being a good neighbor. The rise of social media. Boy, if I ask everybody out there to pull this up. Now this is a miracle right here. My daughter forced me to go in to the Verizon store. She forcibly took my other phone and said, "You've got to have an iPhone, Dad." One of my friends found out I had an iPhone, and he says, "Is Jesus coming soon?" You know, we all have these, and we think, oh, we're connected. Last time I looked, I had 401 friends, or so-called friends. And social media allows us to do some things that we haven't done before, to reconnect with people that we haven't seen in a while, to keep closer touch on friends. Like I have friends I travel and hunt with in Florida, and I can kind of find out what's happening in their lives. But the truth of the matter is, a study done in the last year said that people 25 years ago had 3 close friends. But in spite of the fact we are more connected than ever, the number has dropped to 1 close friend. There may be 401 connections, but out of those 401, I only have probably 3 or 4 very close friends. I'm above average. Those friends aren't there for us to call on in a time of need, or to stand beside us when one of our kids are sick, or whether the wheels fall off our proverbial wagon and we're stranded and stuck somewhere in life. In spite of that fact, people are lonely even though we're more connected than ever. And it's not just young people. It's those like my age and older. Sophie and Shirley were 2 old widows that lived in Florida. And every time a new guy came to their retirement community, they go check him out. One day, a nice-looking gentleman came out by the pool, and Sophie says, "Sophie, you know why I'm shy. Why don't you go over and find out about him? He looks so lonely." Sophie agrees, and so later that day at the pool, she approaches the man and says, "Excuse me, I hope I'm not prying, but my friend and I are wondering why you look so lonely." "Of course I'm lonely," he says. "I spent the last 20 years in prison." "What for?" "For killing my third wife. I strangled her." "What happened to your second wife?" "I shot her." "What happened to your first wife?" Says, "We had a fight and fell off a bridge." Shirley goes back to talk to her friend Sophie, and she says, "You'll never guess what? He's single." You know, loneliness hits people of all ages. But here's how tough loneliness can be on folks. A study just last year in a medical journal said the effect of loneliness on people's well-being is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day or being an alcoholic, and it exceeds the effects of obesity and no exercise at all. It's not just emotional, it's physical. And we live in a world full of lonely people, and that's what we want to talk today. How can we love lonely people? First of all, you can love them with a touch. In Matthew chapter 8, a man with leprosy came and knelt before Jesus and said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus reached out his hand to touch the man. He said, "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Leprosy is a terrible disease. Left untreated, a person will die in about 10 years. And it starts with fatigue and pain in the joints, and then scaly spots begin to develop, and then their body is full of lumps filled with pus. Their face changes shape, and they begin to resemble a lion. And their vocal cords begin to change. And their body literally begins to decompose while they're living in it. And they stink. In Jesus' day, if you were a leper, you were required to live outside the norm. No matter what family you were from, you were an outcast, and you were to warn people by crying out, "Unclean, unclean, stay away." But that didn't bother Jesus. He looked beyond that man's physical appearance, his unclean religious status, and it says he reached out and touched him. Touch is a powerful thing. Jesus didn't have to touch him. You know, he wasn't pleasant to look at. You know, it's kind of like when we deal with someone who's older than ourselves and their hands. I just had a lady, I shook her hand at First Church, whose hand is all gnarled with arthritis. And I said, "Wanda, you shake my hand." And she put those drawn up fingers in my hand and shook my hand this morning. It's not a pleasant experience. You know, we run into people that live on the street and they are crusty and dirty and they don't smell good. Or the kid in our neighborhood that has no running water and is never clean. There's folks out there that just aren't pleasant to touch. Probably one of my most interesting experiences about touching is I pulled into some folks' driveway one day to do a visit, probably been about 25 years ago, and as I pulled in, the gentleman had cancer, and I went to do another visit at their home. The granddaughter comes running out the door, and she says, "Mark, we are glad you're here. Would you take Grandpa's pulse and make sure he's dead?" I wasn't comfortable with going in and taking a dead man's pulse, but I had to say, okay, Jesus would have done this. It wasn't a pleasant experience. And lots of times when we have to touch people physically, it's not a pleasant experience. But it's important. In 1944, they did a case study here in America. They took 40 babies. 40 of them got the most immaculate care available. They were nurtured. They were talked to. They were cuddled. And the other 20 were put in a ward where all they were done was a bottle was stuck in their mouth and their diapers were changed. And in less than 2 months, 50% of the uncared infants had died. Not that their physical needs weren't being met, they were, but emotionally, they just shut down and withered and died, and they called off the experiment. We need to be willing to touch people where they're at. Say, what does that mean? That means be willing to put your hand on someone's shoulder. That means when you go to the nursing home and that little person in the wheelchair speaks to you, that you kneel down and you look them in the eye and you put your hand on their hand and you love them in Jesus' name. Or that little kid that has no one to care for them at home. Now if I can get back up, okay. I've been laying floor all week, so I've been down and up a lot. But reach down and do that. That little kid that nobody cares about. And you do something kind to them by acknowledging them or speaking with them. I know that's tough in today's world. Nobody trusts anybody. That's not new. I grew up with the famous watchwords. If you're from Brazil, Indiana, how many of you grew up with your parents saying, "Remember Billy Martin"? Billy Martin disappeared at the fair or the 4th of July in 1957, 58, long in there. But even with the world the way it is today, there are kids that just need someone to speak to them and encourage them. Do that. A little story that just came across a few weeks ago. Oh, I'll find it here in a minute. Okay. Marlene Brooks came home and noticed a note on her door. Curiously, she opened it up, and here's what she read, and it broke her heart. It was from a lady a couple doors down. It says, "Would you consider becoming my friend? I'm 90 years old. I live alone, and all my friends have passed away. I'm lonesome and scared. Please, I pray for someone." That little lady just needed a touch. So first of all, we can do it by touching people physically. Secondly, we can do it by listening. If we were to look at the road to Emmaus story from Luke chapter 24, Jesus asked these two men who were walking along, "What are you talking about as you're walking along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" What things? Listening to them. And as they went on their way, no doubt Jesus listened to their story of despair. He listened to them talk about, we thought Jesus was the Messiah. We thought that the kingdom of God was coming. And look today, he's dead and in a tomb. He was there to listen to their story. And that's something that you and I need to work on, is to be good listeners. Focus on being interested, not being interesting. That's hard when you stand on this side of the pulpit and you've heard every story in the world. It's hard, but you have to focus on being interested in what's happening in someone's life. Learn to ask them little questions. When you're talking with someone you don't know, "Oh, did you grow up here? What did you like to do as a child?" Just something to break the ice. And lots of times, just by being an inquisitive listener, you get an insight into the loneliness and the brokenness of someone's heart. Listen has the same characters as the word silent. You know, when you listen, you hear a lot of stories. And boy, as a pastor, I get that opportunity. I run into people, I hear their stories all the time about what God's done in their life. To hear about their child. What's interesting, my dad, as he neared 95, began to tell us things we had never heard of. And we had a ball with him. Not that he wasn't senile or anything, but he told us things, you know, we learned at 95 he had taken tap dancing lessons. Well, you never told us that story before, Dad. But we sat down and then after that we began to pry and we found out all kinds of neat stuff besides the other neat stuff we knew. But we learned to be good listeners. One of the things that we deal with people that are lonely, tell me your story. I'd love to hear more. Can I pray with you? Those are important things that someone who is lonely needs to hear. And we need to love people with their time. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. Yes, I will uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness. How many times have you been talking to someone and they say these words, I wish I had spent more time with so-and-so before they died? You see, once time is gone, that's something we can't recover. And there are lonely people who just need a few minutes of your time. I know you're busy. You've got this activity, you've got this one going on, you've got this place to go, this thing to do. But just take a few moments out of your life and give it to someone else. This appeared on one of our Facebook pages from one of our Florida people. It says, my door is always open, my sofa is always warm, and there's a place of peace and non-judgment. Any of my friends who need to chat are welcome to come anytime. It's no good suffering in silence. I have coffee and tea in the cupboard and some kind comfort food that we can pull together. You're always welcome. I know you already know this, but I'm reminding you that I have an open door policy. You and I need to develop an open door policy. Our house has always been that way. I grew up that way. At our house now, we'll tell somebody, if you stop by and we're eating supper, we'll slice the bologna a little thinner. In other words, we're going to say, we're going to make room for you at our table. And we all need to do that. Because loneliness is no respecter of persons. You can be like the billionaire Howard Hughes and be lonely as can be. You can be beautiful as Marilyn Monroe and die of an overdose from loneliness. You can be married and lonely. There are people all around us who are lonely today. They surround us, and they're even sitting today in a seat in this room. Someone who's lost a spouse, or someone who comes all by themselves to worship. They probably, most of them would love someone to sit down, touch them, talk with them, and give them a moment of your time. But you say, how can I use this outside the doors? You and I need to make an effort to reach people. Now, we live in a 32-house neighborhood. Most of the time when we get new neighbors, they get cookies from the Graylesses. And we find out who they are. Remember Pie Day, March 15th, or whatever it was? We made coconut cream and chocolate pie and took 2 pieces to several people in our neighborhood just to break down the barrier of that closed door and find out who they were and what made them tick. Let me tell you what, you show up with a piece of coconut cream pie with meringue on top about like that, anybody will open the door for you. But we try to practice that, my wife and I, of being hospitable, of being neighborly. It is so easy to get in the grind of staying in the same place, even at church. A few years ago, my friend Roger and I were on a trip to Nebraska to turkey hunt, and we left and we got to Galesburg, Illinois. And it was 5:30 our time, and I said, let's just pull in and eat somewhere. So we pulled in, went in Taco Bell. We went up to the counter, ordered our food. We got our drinks, set our drinks down on the table. And I hadn't noticed the door had come open. This little lady, about this tall, had slipped in beside Roger and I. And she pecked me on the shoulder. And she says, excuse me, young man. I said, yes, ma'am, can I help you? She says, you don't intend on sitting over there, do you? And we looked around, and there's 3 people in the whole restaurant. And I said, well, we thought we'd eat real quick and get on down the road. She says, that's where I sit every Tuesday night. And I know that happens at Berea Christian Church too. If you want to make Tom's day, you folks that sit in the same spot every Sunday, switch around. Drive him nuts. But it also puts you in a position to meet that person that sits alone. To build a relationship with someone that you've never built a relationship. Because this room is full of lonely people in spite of the fact there's a crowd here. And I want to encourage you to do it. If you want to overcome loneliness, here's some ways to do it. Unplug and turn off. Some of my best days are days that I declare I'm not turning on the computer, or I leave my phone intentionally at home. Well, what if you have an emergency? Well, it can wait till I get home. What happened 20 years ago? You waited till you got home. Hey, did you know so-and-so called you? But sometimes there's some relief in that. That gives you time to think about others and yourself. Become a better listener. Engage in your community. Get out there and meet people. Isn't that our goal as Christians, to become a neighbor to folks so that we can influence them with Jesus Christ? Practice conversation. Find people who think like you think and engage them in a meaningful conversation. Look up long-lost friends. I got to visit a few weeks ago with a guy who went all the way through high school, with grade school, first grade, all the way through. I'm looking forward to going back. Somebody's had some health issues, and somebody says, hey, he wants to talk to you. So, man, we're having a great visit. I can't wait to go back and visit with him again. He grew up in a very conservative church, and he said, my mom drugged me to church every Sunday. But you know what? I've got a chance to love him and help him by being available. Invite somebody over to your house. That couple that's new in your neighborhood, or just bought the 40 acres down the road. Go down and knock on their door and say, hey, I'm Mark. I live up the road here. Welcome to our neighborhood. Hey, we're having chili. Would you like to come over for chili at our house on Thursday night? I guarantee you my wife will bake a coconut cream pie with meringue that tall on it. And you know what? They take up the offer, and you build a relationship. And that's what overcoming loneliness is all about. It's building relationships with people and eventually building a relationship with God. Because all of us have that built-in loneliness. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says, God has placed eternity on the hearts of men. He's made our hearts like a donut with a hole in the middle that can only be filled by Him. He's given us that natural yearning that there's someone and something bigger than anything we can touch in this world. And we've got a chance to help someone fill that void in their life. When we talked about lonely people, I know you can put a name and a face with someone that you know or you don't know, who's lonely and struggling and suffering. And Christ has called you to be a good neighbor. And that's my call today, is for you to be a good neighbor and reach outside yourself and extend your hand and your opportunity to bless someone else's life today. Let's pray together. Father, it's my prayer today that those people who cross through our lives, who struggle, maybe with no family, no friends, they're the outcast, that as your Spirit empowers us, it's an opportunity for us to be Jesus to them, to touch their wounds, to listen to their story, to give them our time so that you can do a work in their life. We just prayed in Christ's name.